A lot of you who watch my channel are very sick and fed up of the government telling you what to do. Can't own guns, can't own tanks. What do you mean I can't do 120 miles an hour through a school zone? I thought this was America. Sometimes government demands can be reasonable, and a lot of the time they can be not just unreasonable but also downright stupid. But what would you do if one day the government ordered you to kill your pets? That sounds absolutely insane. There is no way at all that the government would ever do that. Well, it's happened before. Please leave a like and a comment on this video because it really helps me in the algorithm. But before we get started, it is in fact your boy, Raid Shadow Legends. Raid has transformed gaming on the move to provide you with the ultimate free-to-play handheld experience. You will conquer raids, dungeons, campaign battles and bosses to build up your champions along the way and take part in my personal favourite mode, the PvP Arena. And since it's roughly around Valentine's Day, might be a little bit late, might be a little bit early, who knows, but Valentine's Day still happened, so I'm going to show you some of my favourite themed champions. Coronar of the Skinwalkers because he looks metal as hell, he is tanky with a huge amount of health which keeps him in the fight. Cupidus of the Sacred Order because his armour is amazingly designed but functionally he has a huge amount of attack power, and also Cupid. Aye, funny isn't it? Yumiko of the Shadowkin is simply one of the best looking and acts as a great defence for your team. Love is in the air, even in the world of Raid. New players can enjoy a special Valentine's Day themed adventure with the Raid Love Quest. All you have to do is download Raid Shadow Legends from the links down below, copy your in-game player ID, and then go to raidlovequest.plarium.com, simply enter your player ID and set out on a heartfelt romantic adventure. This will run from February the 14th to March the 14th. Play one of the Valentine's themed mini games for a chance to win some fantastic in-game and real-life prizes, including Valentine's Day themed champions and even Amazon gift cards worth up to $1,000. Existing Raid players can also go to raidlovequest.plarium.com to find a special promo code to get a small Valentine's gift. Use my link in the description box down below to download Raid for free on your phone or PC, and if you want a starting boost in Raid Shadow Legends, then hit the link down below or scan the QR code on the screen to get unique bonuses worth $30. These rewards are only available to new players and only for the next 30 days, and you can find these rewards here in your inbox. I'm just going to guess and assume that a lot of you have pets, and that those pets are like family to you. I'll also assume that many of you just have a love of animals in general. Well, this video is not going to be very fun for you. We are going to be talking about an extremely regrettable event from British history. In January of 1940, the people of the United Kingdom were under food rationing. This was because food production and imports were slowed to a crawl because of World War II, resulting in a national food shortage. Many of the boats that were bringing food in were under the threat of being bombed or sunk by submarines. And a lot of the food that was produced in the UK was sent to feed the soldiers on the front line. As a result, every citizen had a ration book and coupons to buy a specific amount of sugar, meat, fats, bacon and cheese, except those were not the only foods to be rationed. Other things like dried fruits, canned foods and cereal had become rare enough to become a treat for special occasions. The government were even putting up posters urging people to grow their own food because the lines were so long at the local butchers and bakers that a lot of people had to be turned away by the time they got to the front of the line because the place had ran out of food. For the Americans that always like to joke and say that British food is disgusting, the reason for that is partly because of rationing. Because mothers had to come up with whole new dishes that could be made with the very little that they had. So, very many cheap and easy dishes were invented during this period. And these dishes ended up becoming a part of British culture and are still eaten today. So now that I've laid out that the UK was suffering heavily from low food supplies and that starvation was on the horizon for many, we come to an event in 1938 that spanned 2 years prior to rationing. The government was extremely worried that people may starve because they would share their rations with their pets. And if they didn't share their rations with their pets, then the pets would just die anyway from starvation. They also thought of pets as just hazards because of people's attachment to them. For example, during the Blitz, when many parts of Britain were being bombed, if someone's house had been hit and it was on fire and falling apart, but their pet was still inside, they might run back into the building to try and save them, getting themselves killed in the process. The National Air Raid Precautions Animals Committee, shortened to NARPAC, was a group in charge of sending out public information in regards to protecting all animals from air raids. Not just pets, but also farm and working animals too, since obviously they were very crucial for food production. They were initially made up of many animal charities, animal welfare unions, vets and other shelters in partnership with the government, with the objective of saving as many animals as they could from the German bombings. NARPAC had produced a pamphlet titled Advice to Animal Owners, which advised people to relocate their dogs, cats and other pets outside of the cities for the duration of the raids. The end of the pamphlet simply stated, if you cannot place them in the care of neighbours, it really is kindest to have them destroyed. On top of that, all of the big newspapers and the BBC used their broadcasts and articles to scare pet owners into euthanizing their animals, no doubt under orders from the government as their propaganda arm. But it is something that the government really wanted people to do. And, like most things, if you try and force people into doing something, they most likely won't do it. What works a lot better is if you scare them into doing it. A tactic still very widely used to this day. In fact, I think a lot of you are very familiar with it. In September of 1939, after 1 week of constant fear-mongering from the government and the media, the people were brainwashed and swayed. After all, they were only doing what was best for their pets and everyone else, so why should they feel guilty? And so commenced the killing of around 400,000 pets, mostly dogs, which had been sent away to be killed because of their inconvenience and vulnerability. This figure made up around 26% of all pets in London alone. In North London, a small animal shelter even had a queue over half a mile long with people waiting to hand over their pets. And in only 2 days, the shelter had euthanized 536 animals. With so many animal corpses, they had nowhere to put them. So, the grounds of an old sanatorium was used to bury nearly 500,000 pets. While many pets didn't even receive a gravestone or any kind of marking at all, some people buried their own pets. Though some of their pets' names have not aged well. Even if you could somehow feed your pet, they required a lot of attention, money and care. And during the war, people were stretched thin on all fronts. On top of that, parents had to obviously put their children first and have them evacuated to small towns and villages, sometimes even overseas, so that they would be safe from the bombings that were taking place in the big cities. Not only were children evacuated to places unknown, the parents were even advised by the government to write letters to their children which included telling them that their pets would be just fine. The government believed that the children would feel a lot happier knowing that their smaller, hairier best friends would still be there when they got home. And oh, how wrong they were. Dear Marjorie, little Toby has also gone to live on a farm. No, that's fucked. One of the letters that was sent to an evacuee was signed with a paw print from their dog Chummy. But unfortunately, the ship to Canada that the girl was evacuated on was torpedoed, and the girl was never found. So, a much worse outcome than coming home to find that Chummy was now in doggo heaven. There were also calls for a similar scheme to be put in place where people in more rural areas of the country would look after people's pets until it was safe for them to return. But no scheme was ever achieved since evacuating the vulnerable people took top priority. So the situation was a little bit disorganised. Very many animals had already been killed before the Blitz even started. But once the Blitz had begun, the animal killing went into overdrive. It was even rumoured that around 750,000 pets had been killed overall. As the bombs fell on the cities, destroying people's homes, many of the people were hiding in underground train tunnels when the sirens sounded. And these tunnels were being used as public shelters at this time. And the problem was, no animals were allowed into these shelters because they needed every inch of space to try and save people. Other people had built Anderson shelters in their own gardens, but these were far less effective at keeping people safe from the barrage of bombs. While all of this was going on, people didn't have time to think about their pets or possessions. As soon as those sirens sounded, you had to drop whatever it was you were doing and run as fast as you could to the nearest shelter. So many pets were just left on their own to avoid the destruction of the blasts and the gas attacks that followed. Another driving force for the pet genocide was people assumed that during the mayhem of the Blitz, lots of dogs would escape and this would result in feral packs of dogs roaming Britain's streets. But even though a lot of dogs did get out, that actually didn't happen. So the government branch in charge of protecting animals dropped the standard scare tactics and simply told people to kill the animals in order to protect them. After all, the animals don't need protection if there are no animals. You know, big brain moves from the government as per usual. Despite all of the animal deaths, however, there was an attempt to at least try and reunite owners with lost pets after the bombs had fallen. NARPAC groups had given out numbered collars for pets which were then registered to an owner and an address. So, if they found a pet alive or dead during the morning searches through the rubble, they would at least know who to speak to and, in the best case scenario, return the pets. I will add that while a horrific number of animals were killed, a lot of the boots on the ground in NARPAC did actually try their best to rescue any animals that they could. It was mostly the propaganda pamphlets that had caused people to have their pets put down, and everyone involved in trying to protect the animals were just too overwhelmed, not only with their own personal issues, since people were dying and properties were being destroyed every single night, but also the sheer amount of animals that had to be dealt with, and the numbers were so great that they just couldn't look after and feed them all. One London shelter named Battersea Dogs and Cats Home, however, had actually managed to care for and feed around 145,000 dogs for the duration of the war. Some animals, however, were extremely useful during the war. Not only those that were used on the battlefield, but also working dogs at home, which were used as emotional support companions for children who were affected by the bombings. And the dogs could also help sniff out bodies that were buried under the rubble. The People's Dispensary for Sick Animals, the PDSA, and the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, the RSPCA, were both charities that were obviously against people killing their pets. But There just wasn't much that they could do to stop it. And within no time at all, they were well over capacity with thousands of animals for them to save. Although, when I say save, it was more likely that they just put the animals down themselves, just like a lot of supposed animal charities still do to this day. Weirdly, however, a lot of the people that were bringing in their pets demanded that they be put down and not saved, which is a little bit creepy. Staff were doubled and even tripled in some areas of London in order to put so many pets down. People were abandoning even more pets literally right outside the doors of the charity buildings and not even going inside, likely out of guilt. The National Canine Defence League, the NCDL, today known as the Dogs Trust, were so offended and disgusted with what had happened that they started to call the first week of animal killings the September Holocaust. Nah, some jokes are too easy. There was even some conspiracy that the government had actually wanted to rid urban areas in the country of specifically dogs all the way back to World War I, because these dogs were deemed useless compared to the working dogs out in the country. They also didn't like that dogs needed to be fed and that they left pavements messy, and that's before we even get into the strays, which were likely despised as being flea-infested begging mutts. Obviously, the government couldn't just come right out and say that they hated dogs. They had to be smart about it and tell people that the animals were actually some kind of risk to them, whether that was to their safety, to their health, or to their access to food. The conspiracy actually goes even deeper though, because many of the wealthy people at the time were pro-vivisection, meaning they wanted to do experiments and test products and other chemicals out on dogs, which I'm sure many politicians would have had no issue providing for the right favour or price. So, the upper classes looked down on animals, mainly dogs, with as much disdain as any poor person, if not more. But, as history has shown, poor and homeless people at least served the wealthy some purpose when it came to things like workhouses. Whereas, in their eyes, many animals served no purpose. As the war ended in 1945, so did the death rates of animals. But this only happened after the killing of an estimated 700,000 to over 800,000 pets. However, it turns out that a lot of these animals actually run from fire and the sound of loud explosions for safer rural areas. So, a bunch of them did actually survive just by simply fucking off into the countryside. And you might be wondering why you haven't heard of this mass killing of pets. Well, like many other things involving any war, people either omit or try to forget the horrible things that happened or the horrible things that they did during the war, and try to focus only on the triumphant victory while ignoring all of the awful stuff. However, more importantly, this means that Hitler was responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of dogs, which is the worst thing that he's ever done.
It's Count Dankula on YouTube! Everybody should subscribe!